Good morning and welcome to the Blood Red Daily Transfer Bulletin. My name's Andrew Beasley. I'm joined by Dave Comerford, and we're going to be talking about some of the latest news doing the rounds with regards to Liverpool and elsewhere in the Premier League. Biggest story probably for Liverpool. They and Manchester City are both being linked with a move to sign Villarreal's teenage forward Yeremy Pino. Now, I think we can be reasonably sure that Liverpool's transfer business is done for this summer, but Pino's only 19 years old, so obviously would be one for the future. But obviously, I don't know what you know about him, Dave, but do you think he looks like the kind of player that Liverpool should be going after?
Well, I think, as you say there, it's one of them where it's not going to be a target for this window, but the report is still kind of interesting in the sense that the fact that his name's coming up now in connection with Liverpool, does that indicate that he's kind of on the radar for the future? And I kind of would have thought so. I think, he might be someone on the short list. I mean, you kind of look at him now, I think, sort of numbers-wise, maybe not the kind of level that would appeal to Liverpool just yet, but like you say, only 19 and plenty of time to get those up to the kind of sort of, I guess, high teens or sort of mid-teens with goal scoring, where you'd start to think Liverpool would be interested in, and looks like he could be Liverpool level. And I think it's interesting that, if you look at his profile on FB Ref, one of the players actually comes out as quite similar to is Jarrod Bowen, who we know is someone that Liverpool really like and Klopp's a big fan of. So I think from that point of view, yeah, stylistically speaking, he ticks the boxes. His numbers are decent so far, like I say, without necessarily being Liverpool level, but plenty of time to change that.
Yeah, he certainly looks an interesting player. When I saw the story, I thought I don't remember him from the semi-final, but it turns out he was injured. He didn't play against Liverpool, but he's already done some pretty impressive things. He started the 2021 Europa League final, the youngest Spaniard to start a European final, and then I know earlier this year he scored 4 goals in one game against Espanyol. I think it was about the 53rd minute he'd scored his 4th goal, which is pretty impressive. So as you say, I think the numbers aren't quite there yet, but he's already shown this sort of knack of getting into good positions, and he's got a very high shots on target percentage too. So he sort of seems to know how to test the goalkeepers. He's perhaps just got to up the finishing a touch to turn this sort of potential into, as you say, perhaps slightly bigger numbers.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point you make actually about sort of all the goals coming in that kind of, well, a lot of them coming in that one game against Espanyol, that 5-1 win. And then really that kind of makes you realise that, you can kind of look at the numbers that someone has. So 7 goals and 4 assists last season in his case. But if they're all, if he scored them like 4 in a game or something, like how representative are those numbers? Would you maybe want more of a spread? So I think that kind of comes into it in a way. It's like when a player is only a teenager, you want to kind of have a greater sample size on which to assess them. But yeah, he looks like a very, very bright youngster. And I just think it's one of them where, it's not only going to be Liverpool, but I think the story mentions Man City and several Premier League clubs. I think he's going to be widely monitored. And it's just going to be a case, isn't it, of come sort of the expiry of Salah's extended deal. Then Liverpool, which is in 2025, I want to say, the Salah. Yeah. So when that comes around, if the decision is then taken to kind of part from Salah, and that's the moment where the club moves on, then it's going to be who kind of stands out at that moment and who does it kind of align for. And Pino, who I'd imagine would be sort of like 22 around that time, could be the one that they look at, or equally they might look at someone in the kind of other age bracket they tend to go for, which is kind of like 24, 25. So yeah, I imagine he's definitely going to be on the short list with the recruitment team.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we can only sort of base our opinions on sort of rumours and things like that, but it does seem like there's been a bit of a shift with Liverpool's transfer policy. For a long time, they were buying sort of 24-year-olds, 25-year-olds who were sort of on the brink of their peak years. And then obviously this year we've seen Nunez, who just turned 23, Ramsey and Carvalho, both teenagers. They're now being linked to Pino. They've been linked with Marcos Leonardo, is it, the Brazilian teenager? And obviously Jude Bellingham is still a teenager, albeit already very high-profile player. So do you think this is a thing? Do you think they're now sort of starting to aim even sort of younger in the age market? Or is it just that's what they've done this summer and some of these other stories are just sort of, we're joining dots that aren't necessarily there in reality?
I think it's potentially too early to say. Obviously, there's just been a change in regime at Anfield with Julian Ward coming in and Michael Edwards departing. So it's like you don't want to read too much into the trends. So, for example, Portuguese players or players from the Premier League, is that going to be a hallmark of it? We know Ward has so many contacts in Portugal. Or is it just a case that these two particular players he liked and it was kind of independent of the league that they were playing in? So it's one of them. It's difficult to predict it, but maybe you're right in the sense that we can't maybe apply the kind of Michael Edwards era trends to the Julian Ward time, and he will have his own, inevitably, whilst following similar principles, he will have his own ideas really on the best way to navigate the market. And I think it's an interesting point you make in terms of the profile of players that have come in, obviously kind of like assembling that next generation really, and it could work quite well in the sense that you don't have players who can just compete with sort of and provide cover for the kind of regular starters, but can also kind of succeed them long term. I think Calvin Ramsey is probably an exception for that because Trent is obviously still quite young himself. But it's exciting, isn't it, when you get a player and they come in and you think he could literally be providing us with sort of 10 years of service here, as opposed to just sort of 3 or 4. And I think, you kind of have that with Darwin Núñez to a degree. If everything was to go to plan, and obviously it's hard to predict how the future will go in football. If everything goes to plan, then yeah, it could be the best part of a decade where he's kind of starting for Liverpool. So I think there's definitely an exciting element to it. And yeah, it'll be interesting to see how much that carries forward.
Yeah, as you say, with the front line Liverpool have got now, and with the contract extension for Diogo Jota this week, you've got Jota, Diaz, and Núñez all signed up until 2027. So they could be the sort of foundation of the front line for the next half decade, and as we say, maybe longer because of buying the younger players. But we'll move on to our other talking points. You sort of alluded to it a little bit there with Michael Edwards and Julian Ward and whatnot, because Edwards is in the news as possibly going to Chelsea to become their sporting director. Understandable why they would be interested in him after his success at Liverpool, and perhaps understandable when you look at the transfer business that Chelsea have done this summer. It's not been bad by any means. Koulibaly, Raheem Sterling, the lad from Aston Villa whose name escapes me. Yeah. So, they've signed good players, but they seem to be being linked with De Jong. They seem to be being linked with Cucurella. Again, good players, but it all seems a bit scattershot this summer, which is perhaps inevitable with the change of ownership. But what do you think? I mean, is Edwards likely to go there? I mean, it seems pointless to ask if he'd be good for them, because I'm sure he would. But what are your thoughts on the whole sort of the potential for him to go to Chelsea?
Well, I think there's been indications that Edwards wants a break, first of all, and that's understandable given kind of the scale of the task and the importance that he had at Liverpool. And we probably shouldn't underestimate how much these things kind of impact people's family lives and stuff. So it wouldn't be a surprise for me if he was sort of out of action until kind of the end of the season, and then maybe next summer he starts to think about choosing another club. And it's something really that when he left Liverpool or announced that he was going to, I think everyone thought, how much is this going to impact us in terms of our recruitment operation? I think maybe one thing we didn't consider, certainly immediately, was how much could this strengthen a potential rival, whether that be kind of a domestic rival or a European one. And I'm sure there's going to be interest on kind of all fronts in someone with Edwards' proven caliber, really. I think it could be a really good fit for Chelsea in the sense that, you've had Todd Bowley come in, and I think Marina Granovskaya has left the club. So he's effectively been, I think he's been the interim director of football.
Yeah.
So he's been kind of in charge of the transfer business. And like you say, the players that they've brought in are probably players who, well, Chukwuemeka's kind of long term, but Koulibaly, Sterling, De Jong, Cucurella, you'd imagine that these players can kind of just deliver straight away, to be honest, given the quality that they have. So I'm not saying the business they've done is bad, but I agree with you that it has been a little bit kind of all over the place, and you've got the sense that there hasn't really been that kind of overarching plan there, and that there isn't too much kind of, I guess, subtlety to it as well that you might see from kind of Liverpool, and it has been maybe a little bit on the heavy-handed side. So I think you look at that, that's not going to be a sustainable situation with the chairman doing those two jobs. So he's going to have to find someone, and of the sort of sporting directors who aren't currently like signed up to a club, then Edwards is probably the best one. I think it would be interesting as well because, you know, we don't really know kind of how much Todd Boehly is going to invest year on year in Chelsea. Whether it's probably not going to be comparable to Roman Abramovich, in fairness, but I think it is going to be slightly different to Liverpool still. I don't think he's going to be under the same kind of constraints that he was necessarily at Liverpool in terms of balancing the books. So it'll be interesting to see how he kind of performs in that kind of environment. Is he going to be even more effective and operating potentially with fewer restrictions? Or maybe was he the kind of like specialist who really showed his worth kind of in this sort of Liverpool scenario? So yeah, I think, like I say, a matter of time before he pops up at another huge club. I guess the only thing we can kind of hope for is maybe that he takes on kind of another project kind of thing that doesn't immediately affect us, or that he pops up at a rival rather than sort of a European rival, I should say, as opposed to kind of one of our main Premier League competitors.
Yeah, I think if he were to move overseas, that would probably be preferable to him joining Chelsea. But yeah, that should do us for today. We'll be back tomorrow with discussing the latest transfer news, and obviously we'll have articles on Liverpool.com throughout the day as well. So thank you for joining us.